Joe Forte, thanks so much for joining us. Joe was our first ever Live and Let Live ambassador, and he is running for Tempe City Council. Joe used to be in the Navy for 4 years and then has run his own business in marketing and media for 14 years. He is an excellent human being, and it's a pleasure to have him on this Live and Let Live journey as an ambassador. Joe, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Robbie. I really appreciate you having me and having a discussion with me today, and hope we touch some hearts and minds out there in the world.
Absolutely. It's all about hearts and minds. Joe, what's your motivation?
Yeah, so maybe I can just share a quick background about my path. I mean, I was born and raised in New York, but after high school, I joined the U.S. Navy, and after the Navy, I came out here to Tempe, Arizona, 20 years ago, just to go to college at Arizona State University. Subsequently, I graduated with a degree in business and communications and bought a house here and started a successful business, which I've been running now, as you mentioned. And during the pandemic, had a little time on my hands because I was kind of bunkered up in my house. And so I'd take my dog to the local park, and I just noticed that there was trash all over the park. And I don't know what spurred it, but I ended up a habit of cleaning up the trash from the park. That small act started a nonprofit called Keep Tempe Beautiful, and we do park cleanups, we do tree plantings, we do community gardens, and to date, our organization has removed over 22,000 pounds of trash and litter from city parks and streets, planted close to 200 trees, engaged hundreds of community groups, thousands of volunteers to really get involved in their community and take ownership of their shared spaces. And that was really the catalyst to get me involved in the city. And from that point, I was appointed about 4 years ago to the city's Development Review Commission, which is our city's planning and zoning board, and that gives recommendations to the mayor and council. I've also become a board member of the Kiwanis Club of Tempe, of Tempe Sister Cities, and most recently at Tempe Diablo, which is one of the premier nonprofit organizations in the city. And as I continued giving back, I noticed that there was an opportunity to run for city council. And when I did some exploring, I realized we don't have a single small business owner on the city council. And being a small business owner myself, I feel like it was a viewpoint that should be had, but really the motivation is just to give back. I mean, really starting with joining the Navy and service to the country. I just love volunteering and giving back and being an advocate for change. And as an entrepreneurial type of individual, I think outside the box for a lot of things. I'm a big thinker, and I like to take action on things. And I've always shared that I could always get things done within the city, uh, off or on the council. And I've presented ideas before to council members, and that's kind of where that ends, right? It's okay, great idea, you know, great. Um, but if I'm on the council, I'd actually get things done. And so that was my motivation, uh, seeing things that I'd like to see changed in the city, and knowing that if I was on council, I would actually have the motivation, the discipline, and the insight to actually get it done.
I think someone who starts a charity with the pure intention of cleaning up a town and making it beautiful is very inspiring. There was nothing in it for you. And it's that empowered action. Like anyone can go around picking up litter. Very few people do. But if everyone picked up 2 bits of litter a week, 8 billion people 100 times a year, 800 bits of litter being picked, 800 billion pieces of trash being picked up, we wouldn't have plastic pollution, if we had that attitude. So I think that's really, really amazing. What's the end goal for Joe's? Like, what's your vision? Presumably, city council. I mean, it's a nice way of being able to implement real change at a local level. But like, is this something you want to end up scaling up into a bigger reach?
Well, I mean, I've always lived by the quote from Jim Rohn. He's a business philosopher, and definitely the biggest influence on my life. And his quote says, "Find a way to serve the many, for service to many leads to greatness." And so, however, I don't know what the path holds for me, um, but I know that everything happens for a reason, and this, it's I'm 43 years old, right? So I doubt the city council is going to be the last you've heard of of Joe Forte. But I don't know. I don't know what the future holds. I mean, in because that's not a uncommon question. I mean, people ask, oh, what would be if you were to have anything that you wanted to happen, um, with you and like serving, what would that look like? And funny enough, I say that, in a perfect world, I'd love to be uh, the American ambassador to Italy. If that was to that would be, I think, just the greatest, because it really blends some of my biggest passions, which is, experiencing culture, traveling, my Italian culture, and serving, the United States of America. And an ambassador is it's kind of like the opposite of a politician, where, like, politicians are all about, you know, political maneuvering, and ambassadors is just like just getting things done for the good of the world. And so, that would be the all-time greatest, but I don't know how that ends up.
I'm dreaming of Joe Forte, the live and let live American ambassador for
Mm,
Italy. Like once once we get huge, um, that would be a really beautiful way of kind of building harmony between the disparate national efforts to bring peace and freedom into the local level, building those bridges. So it's cool that you're already an ambassador for Live and Let Live, um,
absolutely.
and you're on the planning and zoning board for Tempe already.
Yes. Mhm.
So presumably, one of the things that you'll focus on on the Tempe City Council would be common sense planning and zoning approach, and also presumably making Tempe beautiful and a nice place to live in terms of the environment, the local environment. So maybe you can touch more on the zoning one and also any other topics that will be central to the change you want to implement.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think that, it was really it was really quite destiny for me to connect with Live and Let Live, especially in the position that I'm at with the zoning and planning board, because a lot of times when you think of these decisions, these public policy decisions, most lean on feeling. What do I feel about this topic or that? And I found that the Live and Let Live, the just the whole concept has really become my North Star for how I make these decisions, because it's really like outside of my own personal taste or feeling. And specifically on the zoning board, and if anyone has had to deal with a zoning or planning board in their town, it's quite frustrating because you have a number of people who they just give you their personal tastes, right? They're like, "Oh, well, the color shouldn't be that because of this," right? Um, and if I'm really just trying to work within a framework of how people are able to live their lives in the most freest way possible, and the only stipulation is to not aggress on others, I think it makes my job a lot easier. And that's going to be a lot of how I would like to govern on the Tempe City Council, and looking at it from that frame of view, because it's very easy to get into these mental gymnastic thoughts on how to govern just from a gut feeling, versus a place of trying to continue the idea of freedom, which I feel like the American founders really intended our government to run.
Yeah, the American founders clearly not perfect. The context was very different, but the principles really are the same. They didn't apply this don't aggress thing equally to all human beings. That's where we've evolved, and we don't see anyone as different, no matter how much melanin one has in one's skin.
Mhm.
But the, this North Star that you talk about, the don't aggress, I do think it's just so fair and efficient, and no matter the John Rawls' veil of ignorance, like this idea that if you didn't know which character you were going to be born as, wouldn't you want equality under the law, and a law that says no matter where you are on earth, you don't get aggressed against?
Mhm.
It's so simple. But I'm interested in actually how that works on the ground, because in some ways it's easy when you think of it in terms of national. No one gets to invade another country without the other country having first initiated force or created a substantial risk. But what about the local level? Like how does this actually apply? Can you bring it to light with some examples of decisions you've made on that planning board with this North Star?
Yeah, absolutely. And I have a couple examples, and one that I feel like maybe I made the wrong decision on, but we'll kind of talk through that. And another that I feel like we did make the right decision on, and both in that in the vein of live and let live. And so there was an individual who came in front of the committee and wanted to put a second story um, kind of balcony on his house, but it was more gonna be like a sun tanning deck, like a place where folks could just kinda relax and take the sun. Um, there was neighbors that came out who were vehemently against this, mainly because they had young daughters who were also sunbathing by the pool. And this second story structure would look directly into their backyard. And it was one of those things where at the time I voted against it. I wasn't in favor of it, and I felt that uh, it was aggressing on their privacy. Um, but this was something that actually through the course of our ambassadorship program with Live and Let Live, we were talking about it with the board. And someone said something that I felt was very true in the sense that the people with the single story pool could have put something that would have obstructed that person's view. They could have put large trees or kind of shade or something that that would have just gave them privacy. And looking back, I feel like that probably was the right um, that could have been a better call. Where yes, the person was had every right to build a second story sun deck on their house, as well as their neighbors had every right to put up a large standing structure that would give them the privacy they needed. And so it was an interesting take because in the confines of the live and let live um, values, both of them could have lived and let live, right? But I feel like it was a situation where um, you know, I live and I learn. You know, it's just another thing. But also there, I'll share with you a more recent issue that came up, and this is pretty timely. Um, there was a commercial zone space, and a a Waymo charging station was being proposed for that space, and there was a huge backlash from the community about should that be butted up right against their residential neighborhood. And there's some stipulations for the Development Review Commission on what would make an agreeable what would we be in favor of if they didn't hit these certain benchmarks. And one of the number one things is it wouldn't increase traffic to a neighboring area. The funny thing about this is that it's all driverless cars. So like the only thing that it would do is increase traffic. I mean, like the only thing it would do is increase traffic to the area. Um, However, it was zoned commercially. And this was actually a conversation that I believe I had with you and Mark, where, as someone who is representing the city, I have to speak on what makes the most sense for the city roads and the city sidewalks and all of the things that are in my purview. And as someone who is representing the city, I felt it was in a disservice for that area, for the streets and for the traffic. So I voted against that. Unfortunately, I didn't influence my fellow commissioners enough to have them vote against it. So it did pass, I think, from a 4-2 vote. But the neighbors actually ended up fighting it, and it's actually going through a process where they're going to be presenting to the city board of adjustments and then ultimately the city council, because for use permits, the development review commission actually has the final say. And so if we approved it and no one was in disapproval of it, it would have that would have been it. But it was another interesting situation where I was looking at, from a live and let live aspect, um, how I was going to make a decision on that, and consulting with you and Mark was actually really helpful to put my arms around the issue. And this is something that, as a Tempe City Council member, I would have to deal with, and I would have to see what is in the best interest of the city. There's also another issue going on about a park permit, and there's a current issue within the city where there's mutual aid groups who are doing outreach to the homeless community using the city parks. And some of the folks who are in support of this measure are sharing, well, the parks are for the people, and the citizens should have every right. But at the end of the day, the parks are in the purview of the city, right? You can't just go there and do whatever you want. The city manages that, and it's the city's decision. And I'm not in favor of doing these outreach events in the city parks, because there are neighbors who also want to use the parks, and I believe that that would be infringing on their right to use the parks in a safe and in a beneficial manner. And so I would like to see on that, because this is something that I've had to speak about throughout my campaign, is I would like to see this be done in private locations such as churches, or American Legions, or the Tempe Women's Club, because if they did it at their location, they wouldn't need to have any permits or anything. I mean, that's within their right as private residents, or having a private location that they can utilize. And so, looking at all of these things with the live and let live concepts as my North Star, I think is very helpful in making decisions, and doing it in a way that I think uh, is is um, is in the benefit of everyone.
Yeah, Joe. So just you talked about your advice you're receiving from Live and Let Live, and just to put that into context, the Live and Let Live Council is the keeper of the philosophy, in the sense that we have these two principles: that the legal principle, don't aggress, and the moral principle, be an excellent human. And the way that Live and Let Live works is we recruit ambassadors, so people that really understand what those two principles mean in practice. And Joe definitely understands those two principles extremely well, lives the example of that philosophy really well. And then we offer support and advice to ambassadors, particularly around their understanding and implementation of that philosophy. So Joe will bring cases like this to us, and the way we usually pass it through is to say, like, who owns the property, and often you're representing the Tempe city, that owns these places, and so your duty is to act in the best interest of those assets that you're the fiduciary custodian of, and um, and so that doesn't necessarily touch on who is the best owner of these things, because arguably, if some of those assets owned by the city were sold off, maybe that helps the overall city's prosperity. But parking that aside, that's how the Live and Let Live ambassador relationship works with the council. And Joe, just then, like, touching on the overall vision you have for Tempe, what could you paint that an overall picture of like how you see Live and Let Live benefiting the lives of the people living in Tempe if applied to issues? Clearly there's more freedom for people to have agency of what they want to do with their own property, but how else could Live and Let Live improve the lives of people living there?
Yeah, I mean, I think just having a overall freedom to do what you want with with your property. I think there's huge implications for that. I mean, one of the main reasons why I'm running is because as a small business owner, when I have conversations with small business owners, they're feeling like they're getting squeezed. I mean, especially because when you're up against, these corporate giants like the Starbucks of the world and the Walmarts and all of these guys. I mean, they have endless money, they have endless resources, and they encourage regulation. They encourage regulation because that's only going to kill their smaller competition. By having a Live and Let Live focused, um, priorities, I feel like you really level the playing field to where mom and pop business owners can actually compete because it is more free to do what they envision, right? To live out their dreams. And I've had conversations with business owners who, for instance, there was one hospitality business owner who had was outfitting a bar a bar space, and in the back of their venue, they were outfitting kind of this bar that was kinda outside. It was like almost like a buggy type of thing, and it took them a year to get that approved through the city. Now, in the meantime, that space was left dormant. So there was a whole, probably 1,500 square feet of outside space that was not being utilized, and they were still having to pay for that, and they were, really like um, not being treated fairly, in my opinion. Where if we had a more Live and Let Live focused environment where it was like, "Hey, this is what you gotta do. If you do it, great." Um, Streamline processes and make things happen, right? I think that, just from that end, I mean, because in my personal view, once upon a time, um, people were always saying, home ownership is the American dream. And I would actually argue for that because sometimes owning a property is an American nightmare, right? I mean, you have something happens to your roof, and then you get hit with a $10,000 roof fixture. That could squeeze you, right? But I personally think that business ownership is the American dream. The ability to start something and grow it to how you see fit, whether that is something without not even in a pursuit of your full employment. I mean, you could be working for a larger organization that you're really passionate about, but still able to do something on the side that makes, $500 extra a month that really makes a difference. And so, in that space, I want to make sure that the city of Tempe is the easiest place to start, run, and grow a small business. And I believe that using the Live and Let Live concepts, we can truly do that.
Yeah, and there's a nuanced point here, which is that Live and Let Live isn't against all regulation. It just
Mhm.
seeks to harmonize regulation with this principle that each human being owns themselves and shouldn't be aggressed against. So there should be rightfully regulations that prevent people doing dangerous activities that put others at substantial risk of harm. But regulations shouldn't be this way for large corporations to capture some competitive advantage over other smaller businesses. And as an investor in my previous job, I saw this all the time. Companies with a special license that basically precluded any competition in that industry, and sometimes those licenses were for dangerous activities like um, uh, maintaining oil wells that could have been could have damaged employees and things like that if there was an accident. But competition generally improves the quality of services that are going on overall, and also no one gets to put their employees at substantial risk of harm if unless of course the employees volunteer to put themselves in that position. So I saw that Amazon was lobbying for higher minimum wages, and you think, how kind of them. But of course, Amazon is also building autonomous warehouses. So if it's harder for mom and pop businesses to employ people, Amazon wins in that situation. They build huge autonomous warehouses, mom and pop business goes away. So it was just so clear that regulations are used for what we kind of call crony capitalism. I think this is where it is exciting to have you on the ground. You're not affiliated. We're not affiliated with your political career at all. We're only affiliated with you as an ambassador of Live and Let Live. But to see the problems you face and then to feed them back to us is such a great way of us learning about some of these application issues on the ground. But Joe, so you've got a campaign running now. Like, what's the actual details of the race? I believe that people start voting on who it is to elect to the city council on the 10th of February, and then it ends on the 10th of March. So what do people do to vote for their council members?
Yeah, so our election, there is 7 candidates that have got enough signatures to be put on the ballot for the March 10th election. And so you have up to 3 votes for the council members that you feel would best represent what you'd like to see in the city. And so, um, yeah, because there's more than 6, if no members get above 50%, the top 6 vote getters will go into a runoff election on May 17th, I believe. And so, yeah, I mean, it's really just about meeting people where they're at and sharing some of the ideas that I have for the city and some of the things that I'd like to do. And that's really, I mean, that's really the long and the short of it. Do coming on shows like this and sharing information about my campaign. And so, yeah, I mean, it's been quite an experience, and I think everything is opportunities for growth. And this is just another line in experiences that I've had a pleasure to be a part of to grow me into a better person.
And who's the message resonating with? Who have you talked to? Which groups and demographics have you talked to where people are like, wow, this makes so much sense. I want to support you.
Yeah, so I've been focused on building really a coalition of a wide range of ideas and interests. I'm running as a registered independent, so not through any major political party, which it has its disadvantages. However, I believe that I wouldn't be doing this if I had to be put into, uh, a political party, so to speak, because I want to represent everyone, right? I hate the idea that um, if you affiliate with a political party, you're either beloved or you're hated immediately after you say that, right? It's like, I am this, I love you, or I hate you. That's it, right? Um, and also, like, I have friends that are, the furthest left and the furthest right that you could be, right? I would consider myself a very middle of the road person, but my message has really been resonating with independents, conservatives, libertarians, and moderates. And I have been getting some progressive support, But Tempe is generally slightly left leaning. If you look at the registered voters, there's 30,000 registered independents, 30,000 registered Democrats, and 20,000 registered Republicans. So if you split that up, it'd probably be like 60-40, 65-35, so to speak. But in this race, there's 7 people, and the 6 people that I'm running against are all registered Democrats. And so, folks that are moderate to kind of on the right of the spectrum feel like there's no one that is kind of aligned with some of their views. And as someone that I would say ideologically, I'm more kind of libertarian. I'm generally speaking, fiscally conservative but socially liberal. I think there's areas of agreement that I find, um, with folks in those camps. But again, I mean, like, even when someone asks me, like, "Are you conservative or are you liberal? Or are you progressive?" It's like, I have conservative views, I have progressive views. I mean, like, I started a environmental organization, which, like, in the scheme of things is typically pretty progressive, right? So, you could take that as it is. I mean, I'm a very sustainable individual. I remember when we met, Robbie, I brought my mug with me, right? So, like, I don't wanna see waste. I want a more sustainable world. I want to see more trees. I wanna see more shade. But I also don't want, the government, like, reaching in my pocket and taking everything that I earn. So, that in a nutshell is kind of like, um, kind of a lot of my philosophy on it. But I feel like I can find common ground with anyone, really. Um, it's just, I think more people try to find their tribe and kind of focus on that versus finding areas uh, of folks that you generally wouldn't see an alliance and see where they can find common ground.
Yeah, you're a reconciliatory force in a very divided world,
Mhm.
and so is Live and Let Live. So Joe, how do people find out more about exactly what your kind of your agenda is in terms of your campaign and follow you and yeah, learn more about you and support you?
Yeah, absolutely. So, my main kind of headquarters is my website. It's forte4tempe.com. You could also find me on all the major social media at Forte4Tempe, and I'm on Facebook, Instagram, X, TikTok. I mean, you name it. I'm all in all the different platforms. And if folks are, generally like hearing what I'm saying and is a supporter of Live and Let Live, I would certainly love to recommend donation. I'm up against 3 incumbents, and they're sitting on quite the war chest. It's hard for non-incumbents to get elected. So anything that you could spare. I mean, I'm certainly not advocating for folks to, spend their last $5 on a campaign contribution. But if you can afford it, they're right on my site. There are donation links, and any little bit helps, to get the message out.
Yeah, and just to invite the other 6 council members up for election, we'd love to chat with them too. Our philosophy is always consistent, and we're not supporting any one candidate, but clearly we want people elected to promote the ideas of freedom and kindness, but voluntary kindness. No two wrongs making a right. So Joe, yeah, thank you so much. I'm sure we'll chat again because there's loads more to chat about, but I've got to go now. But
Absolutely.
thank you so much, and we'll continue the conversation.
Thank you so much, Robbie. I appreciate you and all you do for the movement.
Learn, connect, and lead this community at 3l.org. Peace is our choice, waiting to be made.